From the very beginning, one must grasp the awe-inspiring gravity of sudden divine intervention. For it is unlike anything we encounter in ordinary life. It is unlike the gentle unfolding of seasons, the steady march of hours, the predictable unfolding of human expectation. There comes a moment, swift and unannounced, when the hand of God touches the world with a force that cannot be measured by any human instrument, when millions of souls are stirred, shaken, and awakened simultaneously, as if the air itself had been split by a silent thunderclap that none could anticipate, yet all could feel in the deepest recesses of their being. It is as though time itself were rent in two, the past a memory, the future an unfolding mystery, and the present a searing instant of awareness that cannot be ignored, that refuses to be politely set aside as one might set aside a trivial interruption. There is a certain terror in such suddenness, a certain awe. For human minds are not designed to accommodate the abrupt collision of divine intention with the ordinary rhythms of life. And yet there is also a strange beauty. For in that instant, all pretense falls away, all illusions crumble, and the soul is left bare to the realities of eternity. It is a moment that transcends the mundane, that elevates the common man and the scholar alike. For in the face of the sudden, the wisdom of sages and the cunning of politicians alike prove insufficient. It is the heart, the conscience, the very soul that must respond. For this is not a trial that can be negotiated with argument or logic, but one that demands recognition of a power infinitely beyond human reckoning. Consider, if you will, the countless ways in which humanity attempts to impose order upon life, the endless calculations, the meticulous plans, the careful fortresses of preparation that we erect in our hearts and minds, believing ourselves masters of circumstance, rulers of destiny. And yet, God's sudden act does not respect the careful measures of men. It sweeps aside every scheme with a grace that is terrifying precisely because it is merciful, precise and wholly sovereign. Imagine the ordinary streets, the quiet homes, the bustling marketplaces where people walk unaware, each wrapped in the small but sufficient concerns of existence. And then the instant arrives when God's message pierces through the veil of ordinariness, touching millions without discrimination, regardless of wealth, learning, or station. For the suddenness of divine encounter does not consult human hierarchies or honor human calculations. It is an event that binds together the fates of the learned and the humble, the devout and the indifferent, the courageous and the fearful, and it does so with a certainty that is at once startling and profoundly illuminating. To contemplate this, one must recognize the nature of suddenness itself, for it is not merely the absence of warning, but the presence of immediacy, a moment in which all that has been postponed, all that has been deferred, arrives simultaneously with a weight that cannot be measured. In this suddenness, one finds both judgment and revelation, both the unveiling of truth and the exposure of hidden frailties. How often do we, in our comfort, deceive ourselves into thinking that time will allow us to prepare, that circumstances will bend to our readiness, that the steady accumulation of knowledge or virtue can protect us from the abrupt, the unforeseen, the divine. And yet, the moment comes, and all human assumptions collapse as a house of cards in a wind too strong to resist. There is a lesson here, subtle yet unmistakable, that the preparedness of the soul cannot be measured by outward actions alone, but must reside in a readiness to acknowledge, to submit, and to receive that which is beyond comprehension. The impact upon those millions is not merely external, but profoundly internal. For the heart and mind cannot remain untouched when faced with a reality that defies all prior understanding. Some will feel terror, a sensation that grips with icy fingers and shakes the foundations of certainty, leaving them vulnerable and aware of their limitations in the face of a power infinitely greater than themselves. Others will experience a strange, unanticipated joy, an awakening of hope and purpose that had long been dormant, yet now bursts forth with a clarity that no previous experience could provide. And still others will be struck by sorrow, grief, and a sudden recognition of all that they have neglected, all that they have failed to see, all that they have ignored in pursuit of transient pleasures or false securities. The suddenness ensures that there is no gradual acclimation, no gentle easing into understanding. It is a full, undeniable encounter with the divine presence, immediate, unyielding, and transformative. It is remarkable, too, that such sudden action does not arrive with confusion alone, but with clarity, for God's ways, though inscrutable, have a precision that human comprehension often fails to appreciate. In a single instant, the invisible becomes visible. The intangible becomes tangible. The eternal momentarily intersects with the temporal, and the heart recognizes the majesty and authority that governs existence. One cannot approach this lightly, for it demands a total response, a surrender of pride and a recognition that all human achievement is fragile when confronted with divine immediacy. There is a humility inherent in such moments, a softening of the self, a quieting of ambition, a redirecting of desire toward that which endures beyond the suddenness of circumstance. Moreover, one must not underestimate the communal aspect of this suddenness, for millions are touched together, and in this simultaneous encounter, there emerges an unspoken, invisible bond among those affected. Though separated by distance, culture, and language, there exists a shared awareness, a mutual recognition of the extraordinary event that has occurred, a silent acknowledgement that all are participants in a moment that transcends individual experience. It is as though the pulse of humanity has been momentarily synchronized by a divine hand, and each heartbeat resonates with the awareness of a power far greater than self-interest, far greater than national boundaries, far greater than the petty divisions that often consume attention. In this shared suddenness, there is potential for unity, for a recognition of collective vulnerability, for a turning toward values that endure when all superficial distinctions fade. Yet the suddenness also exposes weaknesses, both personal and societal, for those unprepared in heart or spirit may falter, may react with fear, confusion, or even denial, struggling to comprehend that which cannot be constrained within the familiar frames of logic or expectation. Institutions, routines, and habits that seem indispensable crumble, revealing the frailty of human constructs in the face of immediacy. And in this exposure, there lies a paradoxical gift. For the collapse of the superficial often uncovers the essential, the need for faith, the capacity for compassion, the resilience of the human spirit when anchored in eternal truths rather than temporal conveniences. It is, in this way, that sudden divine intervention, though startling and disconcerting, carries within it a potential for profound renewal, a call to return to values and priorities that might otherwise remain obscured under the weight of ordinary preoccupations. In reflecting upon such an event, one is drawn inevitably to the contemplation of time itself, for suddenness reveals the illusory nature of human schedules, the fragility of plans, and the ultimate insufficiency of all that is measured in hours, days, and years. It is as if the divine hand were to say, "Do not presume to grasp the unfolding of the world by your limited chronometers. There is a rhythm and urgency far beyond your perception." One begins to understand that suddenness is not chaos but a different order, one that transcends human calculation, one that operates according to principles that are invisible yet unerring, and one that calls forth in each person the capacity to respond with integrity, courage, and discernment. Furthermore, the psychological and spiritual dimensions of such suddenness are profound, for they strip away the superficialities that often occupy human attention, compelling the soul to confront questions that have long been deferred, questions of purpose, of morality, of destiny, of the nature of God and the place of humanity within creation. In these moments, the trivial debates, the petty rivalries, the minor anxieties that usually dominate life fall away, revealing the enduring questions that merit contemplation and decisive action. It is a clarifying force, albeit one that arrives with the weight of inevitability, and it demands from each individual a reckoning, a moral and spiritual accounting that cannot be postponed. The suddenness of God's intervention is also instructive in its impartiality, for it touches millions simultaneously without favoritism or prejudice. In this, There is a profound lesson about equality before the divine will, a reminder that the trappings of human status, the illusions of control, the artifices of pride, all these dissolve in the light of what is sudden and true. The rich and the poor, the powerful and the humble, the educated and the unlettered, all are swept into the same stream of awareness, the same encounter with a reality that transcends all human distinctions. This impartiality is at once humbling and liberating, for it reminds each soul of the limits of human judgment, while simultaneously offering an invitation to align with principles that endure beyond circumstance, to cultivate virtues and habits that are not contingent upon fortune or favor, but upon fidelity to eternal truth. And thus, in reflecting upon this sudden striking of millions, one must recognize the multi-layered dimensions of its impact, the individual awakening of conscience, the collective recognition of human vulnerability, the shattering of illusions, and the illumination of eternal truths. It is a phenomenon that defies ordinary narrative, that challenges conventional understanding, and that yet carries within it a clarity and a purpose that reward those who approach it with attentive hearts and open minds. The suddenness, far from being merely disruptive, is deeply instructive, for it forces attention, demands reflection, and calls forth action. It is a moment when the hidden and the neglected are revealed, when the soul is confronted with both its fragility and its potential, and when the awareness of divine sovereignty becomes unmistakably clear. It is essential, therefore, to consider not merely the spectacle of sudden divine action, but its enduring consequences, for the shock of the moment is merely the prelude to a longer awakening, a period in which millions, having been struck simultaneously, are compelled to reassess, realign, and respond in ways that extend far beyond the initial encounter. There is, in this sense, a pedagogical element, a teaching embedded within the suddenness, for God's method is not arbitrary, but designed to elicit understanding, reflection, and transformation, urging humanity to cultivate attentiveness, humility, and spiritual readiness even before any moment of intervention arrives. There is a subtle yet profound truth in the way that spiritual awakening often follows the abrupt and unforeseen trials that God allows to touch the hearts of men and women. For it is rarely the gradual accumulation of knowledge or the careful practice of rituals that brings about the deep stirring of the soul, but rather the sudden, jarring intrusion of circumstances that no one could have anticipated, moments when the familiar landscape of life is broken open and the inner self is compelled to confront realities it had previously ignored or misunderstood, as if the quiet rhythms of ordinary existence were a mere curtain hiding the extraordinary depth and urgency of spiritual life, and the divine hand, unseen yet unmistakably present, lifts that curtain with a swiftness that startles the mind and illuminates the heart with a clarity that ordinary experience seldom provides. For in the wake of sudden trials, there is an unmasking of self, a revelation of inner strengths and weaknesses, of fears long suppressed, of longings that were faintly discerned but never fully acknowledged, and it is here, in the space opened by disruption, that the soul begins to awaken to truths that had been waiting in silence, as though they knew that ordinary attention alone would never suffice, that only the shock of circumstance, the pressure of the unexpected, could loosen the rigid bonds of distraction and compel the individual to look beyond the superficialities of life and toward the eternal, toward that which endures when all else is stripped away. And this awakening is not a timid or partial recognition, but a comprehensive stirring of the spirit. For the heart, when touched in this way, feels both its own frailty and its capacity for profound responsiveness, its limitations and yet its readiness to embrace truths greater than itself, its fear and yet the latent courage that rises in response to the call of God, who in the suddenness of trial reminds humanity that life is not merely a series of accidents or minor inconveniences, but a theater in which eternal realities are enacted, and in which the soul, when confronted with the unforeseen, is summoned to awaken to a sense of purpose, a moral clarity, a spiritual alertness that had been dormant or untested. For it is precisely the unexpected, the abrupt, the unforeseen that has the power to pierce the ordinary complacency of human life, and to invite the mind and heart to ascend beyond mere survival, beyond the concerns of comfort and convenience, toward a vision of life in which the temporal is understood in the context of the eternal, and the fleeting anxieties of the moment are weighed against the vast horizon of divine reality, as though the soul, momentarily liberated from the routines and distractions of ordinary existence, perceives for the first time the interwoven patterns of providence and purpose that govern the world, patterns that had always been present but obscured by the noise and business of life, patterns that the sudden trial reveals with a force that cannot be ignored. For awakening in this context is both a recognition and an invitation, a recognition that life is more profound, more urgent, more sacred than had been understood, and an invitation to participate consciously in the shaping of one's own spiritual destiny, to engage with the moral and ethical dimensions of existence with renewed attentiveness, to cultivate habits of reflection, prayer, contemplation, and moral vigilance that prepare the individual for the ongoing interplay of challenge and revelation. For it is in such moments that character is refined, that virtues are tested, that the soul learns to distinguish between the ephemeral and the enduring, and to anchor itself not in the transient currents of fortune or opinion, but in the steadfast realities of faith, hope, and love, which endure when all else is shaken, which provide a secure ground when circumstances are uncertain, which illuminate the path when the way forward seems obscured by confusion or fear. And in this awakening, there is also a communal dimension, for the spiritual stirrings of one are often mirrored in others, and the shock of trial, though intensely personal, ripples outward, touching communities, families, nations even, revealing the interconnectedness of human experience and the shared responsibility to respond to divine calling with courage, clarity, and compassion. For the awakening is never meant to be purely private, isolated, or self-serving, but is meant to inspire a larger engagement with the world, a commitment to goodness, justice, mercy, and truth, which become the hallmarks of those who have been touched, even fleetingly, by the sudden and awakening power of God. And it is fascinating that such awakenings do not always occur in the dramatic, public moments one might expect, but often in quiet, hidden, unremarkable circumstances, in the heart of routine, in the midst of ordinary labor, in the midst of personal trials that seem insignificant until they intersect with the divine, and in these intersections, the soul recognizes the sacredness of every moment, the potential for every encounter, the significance of every action. And the awakening is both gentle and formidable, a paradox that challenges understanding, for it is tender in its invitation yet compelling in its demand, urging the individual to rise above passivity, to cultivate attentiveness, to embrace the spiritual life with sincerity, depth, and courage, and to recognize that the trials which precipitate awakening are themselves gifts, though they may come clothed in discomfort, loss, confusion, or fear. Gifts because they prompt reflection, insight, discernment, and moral courage, shaping the character and aligning the heart with the eternal. And in this shaping, there emerges a sense of clarity that cannot be achieved through intellectual effort alone, a clarity that illuminates purpose, direction, and priorities, guiding the awakened soul toward actions, decisions, and relationships that are infused with meaning, integrity, and compassion. And so the spiritual awakening that follows unexpected trials is both profound and far-reaching, reshaping not only the inner life but the outward expression of faith, conduct, and engagement with the world, creating a resonance that persists long after the immediate trial has passed, and teaching the individual that life, though unpredictable and often challenging, carries within it the constant possibility of renewal, transformation, and alignment with the divine will. And it is precisely in the sudden, the unexpected, and the unanticipated that the soul discovers its capacity for growth, resilience, and profound connection with the eternal. For in awakening, one learns that the deepest truths are often revealed not in comfort, not in routine, not in gradual accumulation, but in the intensity of surprise. the sharpness of disruption, the immediacy of divine encounter, and that these awakenings, touching millions, create ripples that extend across time and space, inspiring generations, reshaping communities, and inviting all to participate consciously in the work of the Spirit, which is to awaken, to align, to discern, and to act with fidelity, courage, and love. And it is here, in this interplay of trial and awakening, that humanity glimpses the extraordinary potential that lies latent in every life, ready to be stirred by God's sudden, gentle, and yet compelling touch. There is an enduring wisdom in the recognition that life, in its exquisite and unpredictable complexity, is always capable of presenting moments that arrive unbidden, unexpected, and unannounced, moments that demand not merely attention but preparation of heart, mind, and soul, for the unforeseen is not a rare occurrence, but an ever-present possibility woven into the very fabric of human existence. And the call to prepare is therefore a call to cultivate vigilance, attentiveness, and spiritual readiness in all circumstances, to nurture a life in which the heart is not easily shaken by sudden trials, the mind not clouded by fear or confusion, and the spirit not caught unawares by events that could otherwise provoke despair, hesitation, or misjudgment. For preparation is not merely a matter of arranging external circumstances, of stockpiling resources, or of constructing elaborate contingencies, but of forming a character, a moral and spiritual resilience that equips one to respond wisely, courageously, and faithfully when the unexpected arrives. For it is in these moments that the true measure of the individual is revealed, not in the predictability of comfort or convenience, but in the readiness to act, to discern, to trust, and to embrace the unfolding of divine providence with composure and clarity. And it is remarkable to observe how often the failure to prepare leaves the heart vulnerable, the mind anxious, and the soul unsteady. For human tendencies lean toward postponement, distraction, and reliance on appearances rather than on enduring truths. Yet the call to preparation insists upon cultivating a vigilance that is both subtle and profound, a constant attentiveness to the realities of life, to the needs of others, to the imperatives of conscience, to the quiet promptings of spirit, so that when suddenness strikes, the soul is not caught in confusion but responds with discernment, balance, and integrity, recognizing that no event, however unforeseen, falls outside the scope of divine oversight, and that those who have aligned their lives with eternal principles are able to meet disruption with a sense of purpose, courage, and calm, transforming potential chaos into opportunity for growth, insight, and renewed commitment. For preparation is itself an act of faith, a trust that one's attention to moral and spiritual disciplines will bear fruit when circumstances demand immediate and unhesitating response. And it is through such preparation that the individual cultivates not only personal resilience, but a capacity to serve others, to offer guidance, encouragement, and support in the midst of uncertainty, creating ripples of stability, courage, and hope in a world too often unprepared for sudden change. And this readiness is manifested in many forms, in the cultivation of humility that acknowledges human limitations, in the practice of prayer and reflection that anchors the soul, in the pursuit of knowledge tempered by wisdom, in the formation of habits that strengthen character, in the nurturing of relationships rooted in love, loyalty, and compassion, and in the recognition that preparation is not static but ongoing, an active engagement with life's uncertainties that requires constant attention, discernment, and willingness to adjust, for the unforeseen is never entirely knowable, yet the disciplined heart and mind can navigate it with grace, integrity, and courage, turning potential fear into opportunity, potential confusion into clarity, and potential despair into hope. And there is a particular beauty in understanding that preparation is not only for the individual, but for the collective, for communities, families, and nations' benefit when hearts and minds are attuned to moral and spiritual truths, capable of responding to sudden events not with panic but with deliberate, thoughtful, and compassionate action, recognizing that one's readiness can influence others, offering steadiness in the midst of turbulence, and creating a sense of shared responsibility and resilience that transcends individual circumstance. For unforeseen events often reveal the depth of human interconnectedness, and the preparedness of one can become a source of strength for many, guiding decisions, inspiring courage, and fostering hope in ways that multiply the impact of disciplined attention to heart and life. And thus the call to prepare is both personal and communal, an ethical and spiritual imperative, a recognition that life's suddenness is inevitable, and that the unprepared heart is vulnerable not merely to external disruption, but to internal confusion, anxiety, and moral compromise, while the prepared heart is positioned to respond with clarity, purpose, and fidelity, perceiving opportunities for good even in the midst of difficulty, discerning the lessons embedded in trials, and cultivating virtues that endure beyond circumstance. And it is important to emphasize that preparation is not a burdensome or fear-driven exercise, but a joyful, hopeful, and empowering practice, a cultivation of awareness, discernment, and spiritual sensitivity that enriches every aspect of life, allowing the individual to live fully, act responsibly, and embrace the unfolding of providence with courage and trust. And in this sense, preparation is both a safeguard and a blessing, equipping the soul to navigate sudden change, to meet trials with resilience, to recognize the hand of God in every circumstance, and to live in a state of alert attentiveness that transforms ordinary existence into a life infused with meaning, purpose, and readiness, where the unforeseen is not merely a threat, but an invitation to exercise virtue, practice wisdom, and deepen faith, to engage with the eternal realities that frame human experience, and to align life's choices, actions, and priorities with the enduring principles that guide toward integrity, courage, and love. And so the call to prepare one's heart and life is ever present, continuous, and essential, a divine invitation to cultivate readiness in all things, so that when the unexpected arrives, the soul is neither shaken nor overwhelmed, but rises to meet the moment with poise, clarity, and purpose, and in doing so, transforms the sudden into the meaningful, the unforeseen into the instructive, and the unexpected into an opportunity for spiritual growth, moral insight, and deeper communion with God. And this preparation, practiced faithfully over time, becomes a habit of the soul, a lens through which all experiences, both ordinary and extraordinary, are interpreted, shaping character, guiding conduct, and ensuring that the individual is equipped not only to survive sudden challenges, but to respond to them with wisdom, courage, compassion, and hope. And the beauty of such a life is that its preparedness ripples outward, influencing others, strengthening communities, and fostering a culture of attentiveness, resilience, and moral clarity, reminding all that the unforeseen is not merely a test, but a call to live fully, act wisely, and embrace the eternal truths that endure beyond every trial, every shock, every sudden change. And that, by heeding this call, one participates in the divine design, cultivating a heart attuned to God's purposes, a mind alert to moral and spiritual realities, and a life capable of meeting the unexpected with strength, faith, and grace, creating a witness not only to personal readiness, but to the power and presence of God at work in the world. For in the careful preparation of heart and life, the unforeseen becomes a mirror reflecting divine wisdom, a canvas for the display of virtue, and a proving ground for courage, faith, and love, revealing that those who cultivate readiness are not merely protected from calamity, but empowered to respond in ways that bring light, hope, and goodness into the lives of many, embodying the eternal principle that vigilance, discernment, and spiritual preparation are the surest guides through the sudden and unpredictable events of life. And it is this realization that calls all to constant attentiveness, faithful practice, and courageous engagement with the world, so that the heart is prepared, the life aligned, and the spirit ready to meet the unforeseen with wisdom, composure, and a steadfast commitment to what is true, good, and enduring.